Hi friends, my name's Naomi. Welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be talking about my favorite romance books of all time. I don't have too many. This is a pretty short list. I think I only have about 6 of them on my list. And that is honestly because I only started reading romance probably like last year in 2022. Or I was reading in 2021 some romance, but I wasn't like sure exactly what I liked. So I wasn't liking a lot of romance. So at the time, I just thought that I didn't enjoy the romance genre, but then last year in 2022, I found some of my favorite romance books of all time, and this year alone, I've read 2 of my favorite all-time favorite romance books, so I wanted to share just in case there are some people out there that haven't really clicked with the genre. These are some of my favorites, and I just want to say that usually I tend to like a bit of a more dramatic and more sad romance, and I do enjoy more of the closed door romances. I don't love the open door. It's not my absolute favorite. I will say some of these are steamy, so don't get me wrong there if you do enjoy that. But yeah, I'll just get into all of that. But like I said, I do enjoy a bit more of a sad romance, and I also love a lot of romances that have to do with grief or have like another really big aspect in the story, whether it's like a family member or like another relationship or their job. Like, I enjoy romance books that also have a big other component to them and not just the romance. I don't know if that's making any sense, but I hope it does. Okay, so first off, I have to start off with like my favorite. Should I leave this for last? I'll leave it for last. Let's start with, there's no order to these, but I'll start. It's not my least favorite because obviously it's on this list for a reason. But anyway, I'm just gonna start. The first book on this list is The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. I think the main character might be like 19, 20, but this does feel very young adult. Or maybe like new adult, I don't really know. This one follows Kayla, I don't know, Kayla Fletcher, and her parents have been divorced for many years, and she basically lives with her mother. I forget where they live, but her mother basically met her dad, her biological dad, who she's divorced from. They met in Alaska, and they lived in Alaska for many years, and then they got divorced, and she moved to somewhere in the States. I forget where it was. Oh no, it's not the States, it's Toronto where she moved to. Then Kayla I'm sorry, she learns that her dad, whose name is Ren, has cancer and his days might be numbered. So she decides to go to Alaska to visit her dad, spend time with her father. This book is very big city girl goes back home or goes to a small town and she meets a small town boy. But the one thing that I loved so much about this book was the small town vibes. The romance, of course, is great, but also her relationship with her father is a really big aspect of this book. And yeah, I just really loved it. This is a series and I haven't continued it, but this is one of my favorite romances. Next up, I have the only young adult book in this list, and that is Ophelia After All by Raquel Marie. And this one follows Ophelia. She loves gardening. She is Cuban. She's in high school. She has a really cool group of friends, and she has a lot of crushes on boys, like way too many boys. Like, that's what everybody knows her for. But one day she finds herself thinking a lot about Miss Talia Sanchez, which is obviously another girl. So obviously in this book we are exploring Ophelia's sexuality. Also, it is her senior year in high school, so she's kind of navigating through all of these changes and the fact that her friend group can change because obviously they're not going to be in school together all the time. And I feel like my favorite thing about this book was the romance. There is like, our main character has a romance, and there's also like other side characters that have their own romance. But one of the things I loved the most about this book was Ophelia's journey and like through all these changes, and also There's a really big theme in the book that she was so scared because her family and friends have known her whole life to be this one thing, and the fact that her sexuality could change that perspective of her to them really scared her. So that is one theme in this book that I adored, that it was explored. So yeah, I love this one. Read it. Alrighty, so the next couple of books I don't have with me because I love them so much that I've let other people borrow them because I want everybody to read them, so I don't have them physically with me. But the next book that I have is my favorite Emily Henry, and that is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. So Book Lovers follows Nora, who is a workaholic. She is a literary agent and she is cutthroat. Basically, her little sister Livy invites her on like a little girl's trip to this small town. It's very reminiscent of like Stars Hollow, and she invites her to go out. I don't remember exactly why they need like this getaway. I'm assuming it's just because Nora is such a workaholic and they wanted to connect. But they basically go on this little trip and they have like all of these things planned that they're going to do, very like small town Gilmore Girls type trip. And then in this small town, she keeps bumping into Mr. Charlie Lastra, who is a brooding editor in the literary world, and they've actually crossed paths before and they don't really like each other. So yeah, it's a very enemies to lovers. And then also I loved the sister dynamic in this book. Their relationship was really great. Yeah, that is the third book on this list, and it is my favorite Emily Henry. Next up, I have the most recent romance that I read, and that is Thank You for Listening by Julia Whelan. I actually read this in audiobook. I do want to own a physical copy of this because I loved it so much. And if you don't know, Julia Whelan is a really big audiobook narrator, and this isn't her debut. I think this is her second book that she's ever written, and she narrates the audiobook for this book, so I wanted to listen to it. And this book follows an audiobook narrator, and I just thought it was so cool and interesting. When I started reading this book, you learn so much about the audiobook industry in this book alone, and it's written by an audiobook narrator, so like she knows all of the ins and outs of that industry. So it was so interesting to read. And yeah, basically we follow this audiobook narrator. Her name is Swanee, which I thought was a really interesting name. And before she started doing audiobooks, she was an actress. She actually had this really big accident that happened that they talk about in the book, but she actually wears an eye patch, and she had this accident happen to her, and that's also a lot of trauma in there. She's this really big audiobook narrator, but she's kind of sworn off from doing romance books. She doesn't want to do them anymore. And one day she's offered this really big contract to do this romance audiobook for like a really big romance writer who just passed away, and she can't pass it up because she needs the money. And you learn throughout the book why she needs the money, but yeah, she can't pass it up, and it's kind of a dual narrator type of situation. So she's also doing this project with this other guy audiobook narrator who's like one of the biggest male audiobook narrators in the romance genre, and they kind of start emailing each other back and forth, and it's really cute. I really loved it. I loved listening to their emails and their banter. It was so cute. Our main character's best friend, I forgot her name, but Swanee's best friend, that friendship alone was so incredible. Also obviously the romance, and also there is a really cute dynamic with our main character and her grandma. It made me really miss my grandma, and I was like ready to book a flight to Puerto Rico as I was reading this book, because I was like, this book is making me miss my grandma. But yeah, like I said, it's amazing romance to start, and then there's all these different dynamics and relationships with her best friend and her grandma, also her father and her mom and her stepdad. Like, all of the side characters are amazing. So I really love this one. I feel like this one's like slowly becoming my favorite romance of all time, but yeah, I think over time it'll grow even more love in my heart for this book. I don't know what I'm saying. Alrighty, next up I have another romance that I read this year, and that is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. This one was so great. This one's romance, but also kind of fantasy-ish. I don't know if magical realism is the right word for this. I keep having to go on Goodreads because I forget the main characters' names. As soon as I stop reading these books, like, their names are gone out of my brain. Florence, her name is Florence. So The Dead Romantics follows Miss Florence, who she is a ghostwriter, and basically she had this really big breakup happen to her, so she doesn't believe in love anymore, so she doesn't want to write romance anymore, but that's kind of what she's been hired to do, is to write romance. And like I said, she's a ghostwriter and she can see ghosts, which is kind of where the magical realism fantasy aspect of the story comes into play. And she gets a really sad call that her dad passed away, so she has to return to her hometown. And basically their family owns like the funeral home in their small town. Her family has always talked a lot about death, and also her father could also see ghosts, so they always saw like that she could see ghosts as a gift. So basically she goes back home. So this book obviously has to do a lot with grief, and obviously her navigating her professional career as a ghostwriter, and obviously there is romance. I won't spoil like the romance or anything. I won't even say who the guy is because I went into it not knowing, and I loved finding out as I was reading it, so I'll leave that to you. But just know that this book is the cutest thing on planet Earth. I know that there's a lot of dead things in this book, but it's really cute and I loved it. And yes. Alrighty, like I said, this list is not very long because I haven't read too many romance books because I just got into the genre. So this next book is the last one. So last but not least, one of my all-time favorite books is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. I read this book last year, and obviously it made it to my 2022 favorite books of the year. This one also has like that trope of like big city girl meets small town boy, and our main character, her name is Alexis, and she is actually a doctor, so she works for like an ER. Her family has owned, I don't know if they owned the hospital or like what it is, because I don't know much about all of that doctor like boards and all of that. I don't know much about it, but they're pretty rich. There is this is an age gap romance also. They're like 10 years apart, and I didn't think that I'd love an age gap romance until I read this book. But basically she meets Daniel, who is a small town boy. I forget, I think at the beginning of the book, like her car like breaks down or something, and he kind of helps her, and they just end up talking. So she meets him, and he's a small town boy, and she's a big city girl, and her family has all of these like expectations of her, and she's also going through a really bad breakup in the way that her ex-boyfriend was very manipulative, toxic, and just abusive. So you get to see her brain with all of that, and learning to love this person but also not wanting him to be part of her world, part of your world, get it? But she doesn't want him to like see her world because she kind of has been lying about, or like not lying, but she's been not telling him that she's rich, she's a doctor, like her ex and her family and all these expectations that they have of her. So she doesn't really want him to know all those things, so she's been kind of keeping him away, and basically to just get all of her inner dialogue. And it's a great book. All of my friends that have read this book after me that I recommended, they also love it. So needless to say, if you haven't picked up Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez, please do. But yeah, like I said, that's it, because I don't read a lot of romance, so those are all of the favorites of all time romance books that I've read. If you have any suggestions, please let me know. Like, as you could see with the theme, I love a romance, but also like a romance book that has some like trauma, or like there's some type of grief, or just something else to the story that is not just like the romance, because I find that a little boring most of the time. So if you know any books that have like weird family dynamics or like grief or all of those things and are a romance book, please let me know, because I want to read them. But yeah, those are all of the books. I hope that you all enjoyed this video. I enjoyed making it. I never thought in my life that I'd be making a favorite romance books of all time video on my channel. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.